Section 10 of Coningsby, or the New Generation, by Benjamin Disraeli. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 3, Chapter 1. There are few things more full of delight and splendour than to travel during the heat of a refulgent summer in the green district of some ancient forest. In one of our Midland counties there is a region of this character, to which, during a season of peculiar lustre, we would introduce the reader. It was a fragment of one of those vast sylvan tracts wherein Norman kings once hunted and Saxon outlaws plundered, and although the plough had for centuries successfully invaded brake and bower, the relics retained all their original character of wildness and seclusion. Sometimes the green earth was thickly studded with groves of huge and vigorous oaks, intersected with those smooth and sunny glades that seem as if they must be cut for dames and knights to saunter on. Then again the undulating ground spread on all sides, far as the eye could range, covered with copse and fern of immense growth. Anon you found yourself in a turfy wilderness, girt in apparently by dark woods, and when you had wound your way a little through this gloomy belt, the landscape, still strictly sylvan, would beautifully expand with every combination and variety of woodland, while in its centre the wildfowl covered the waters of a lake, and the deer basked on the knolls that abounded on its banks. It was in the month of August, some 6 or 7 years ago, that a traveller on foot, touched, as he emerged from the dark wood, by the beauty of this scene, threw himself under the shade of a spreading tree, and stretched his limbs on the turf for enjoyment rather than repose. The sky was deep-coloured and without a cloud, save here and there a minute, sultry, burnished vapour, almost as glossy as the heavens. Everything was still as it was bright. All seemed brooding and basking. The bee upon its wing was the only stirring sight, and its song the only sound. The traveller fell into a reverie. He was young, and therefore his musings were of the future. He had felt the pride of learning, so ennobling to youth. He was not a stranger to the stirring impulses of a high ambition, though the world to him was as yet only a world of books, and all that he knew of the schemes of statesmen and the passions of the people were to be found in their annals. Often had his fitful fancy dwelt with fascination on visions of personal distinction, of future celebrity, perhaps even of enduring fame. But his dreams were of another colour now. The surrounding scene, so fair, so still and sweet, so abstracted from all the tumult of the world, its strife, its passions, and its cares, had fallen on his heart with its soft and subduing spirit, had fallen on a heart still pure and innocent, the heart of one who, notwithstanding all his high resolves and daring thoughts, was blessed with that tenderness of soul which is sometimes linked with an ardent imagination and a strong will. The traveller was an orphan, more than that, a solitary orphan. The sweet sedulousness of a mother's love, a sister's mystical affection, had not cultivated his early susceptibility. No soft pathos of expression had appealed to his childish ear. He was alone, among strangers calmly and coldly kind. It must indeed have been a truly gentle disposition that could have withstood such hard neglect. All that he knew of the power of the softer passions might be found in the fanciful and romantic annals of schoolboy friendship. And those friends too, so fond, so sympathizing, so devoted, where were they now? Already they were dispersed. The first great separation of life had been experienced. The former schoolboy had planted his foot on the threshold of manhood. True, many of them might meet again. Many of them the university must again unite, but never with the same feelings. The space of time passed in the world before they again met would be an age of sensation, passion, experience to all of them. They would meet again with altered mien, with different manners, different voices. Their eyes would not shine with the same light. They would not speak the same words. The favourite phrases of their intimacy, the mystic sounds that spoke only to their initiated ear, they would be ashamed to use them. Yes, they might meet again, but the gushing and secret tenderness was gone for ever. Nor could our pensive youth conceal it from himself that it was affection, and mainly affection, that had bound him to these dear companions. They could not be to him what he had been to them. His had been the inspiring mind that had guided their opinions, formed their tastes, directed the bent and tenor of their lives and thoughts. Often indeed had he needed, sometimes had he even sighed for, the companionship of an equal or superior mind, one who, by the comprehension of his thought, and the richness of his knowledge, and the advantage of his experience, might strengthen and illuminate and guide his obscure or hesitating or unpractised intelligence. He had scarcely been fortunate in this respect, and he deeply regretted it, for he was one of those who was not content with excelling in his own circle, if he thought there was one superior to it. Absolute, not relative distinction was his noble aim. Alone in a lonely scene, he doubly felt the solitude of his life and mind. His heart and his intellect seemed both to need a companion. Books and action and deep thought might in time supply the want of that intellectual guide. But for the heart, where was he to find solace? Ah, if she would but come forth from that shining lake, like a beautiful Ondine! Ah, if she would but step out from the green shade of the secret grove like a dryad of sylvan Greece! O mystery of mysteries, when youth dreams his first dream over some imaginary heroine! Suddenly the brooding wildfowl rose from the bosom of the lake, soared in the air, and uttering mournful shrieks, whirled in agitated tumult. The deer started from their knolls, no longer sunny, stared around, and rushed into the woods. Coningsby raised his eyes from the turf on which they had been long fixed in abstraction, and he observed that the azure sky had vanished, a thin white film had suddenly spread itself over the heavens, and the wind moaned with a sad and fitful gust. He had some reason to believe that on the other side of the opposite wood the forest was intersected by a public road, and that there were some habitations. Immediately rising, he descended at a rapid pace into the valley, passed the lake, and then struck the ascending wood on the bank opposite to that on which he had mused away some precious time. The wind howled, the branches of the forest stirred, and sent forth sounds like an incantation. Soon might be distinguished the various voices of the mighty trees as they expressed their terror or their agony. The oak roared, the beech shrieked, the elm sent forth its deep and long-drawn groan, while ever and anon, amid a momentary pause, the passion of the ash was heard in moans of thrilling anguish. Coningsby hurried on. The forest became less close. All that he aspired to was to gain more open country. Now he was in a rough flat land, covered only here and there with dwarf underwood, the horizon bounded at no great distance by a barren hill of moderate elevation. He gained its height with ease. He looked over a vast open country like a wild common. In the extreme distance hills covered with woods, the plain intersected by two good roads, the sky entirely clouded, but in the distance black as ebony. A place of refuge was at hand. Screened from his first glance by some elm trees, the ascending smoke now betrayed a roof, which Coningsby reached before the tempest broke. The Forest Inn was also a farmhouse. There was a comfortable enough looking kitchen, but the ingle nook was full of smokers, and Coningsby was glad to avail himself of the only private room for the simple meal which they offered him, only eggs and bacon, but very welcome to a pedestrian and a hungry one. As he stood at the window of his little apartment, watching the large drops that were the heralds of a coming hurricane, and waiting for his repast, a flash of lightning illumined the whole country, and a horseman at full speed, followed by his groom, galloped up to the door. The remarkable beauty of the animal so attracted Coningsby's attention that it prevented him catching even a glimpse of the rider, who rapidly dismounted and entered the inn. The host shortly after came in and asked Coningsby whether he had any objection to a gentleman who was driven there by the storm, sharing his room until it subsided. The consequence of the immediate assent of Coningsby was that the landlord retired and soon returned, ushering in an individual who, though perhaps 10 years older than Coningsby, was still, according to Hippocrates, in the period of lusty youth. He was above the middle height, and of a distinguished air and figure, pale, with an impressive brow, and dark eyes of great intelligence. "I am glad that we have both escaped the storm," said the stranger, "and I am greatly indebted to you for your courtesy." He slightly and graciously bowed, as he spoke in a voice of remarkable clearness, and his manner, though easy, was touched with a degree of dignity that was engaging. "The inn is a common home," replied Coningsby, returning his salute. "And free from cares," added the stranger. Then looking through the window, he said, "A strange storm this. I was sauntering in the sunshine, when suddenly I found I had to gallop for my life. 'Tis more like a white squall in the Mediterranean than anything else." "I never was in the Mediterranean," said Coningsby. "There is nothing I should like so much as to travel." "You are travelling," rejoined his companion. "Every moment is travel, if understood." "Ah, but the Mediterranean!" exclaimed Coningsby. "What would I not give to see Athens!" "I have seen it," said the stranger, slightly shrugging his shoulders, "and more wonderful things. Phantoms and spectres, the age of ruins is past. Have you seen Manchester?" "I have seen nothing," said Coningsby. "This is my first wandering. I am about to visit a friend who lives in this county, and I have sent on my baggage as I could. For myself, I determined to trust to a less commonplace conveyance." "And seek adventures," said the stranger, smiling. "Well, according to Cervantes, they should begin in an inn." "I fear that the age of adventures is past, as well as that of ruins," replied Coningsby. "Adventures are to the adventurous," said the stranger. At this moment a pretty serving maid entered the room. She laid the dapper cloth and arranged the table with a self-possession quite admirable. She seemed unconscious that any being was in the chamber except herself, or that there were any other duties to perform in life beyond filling a salt cellar or folding a napkin. "She does not even look at us," said Coningsby, when she had quitted the room, "and I dare say is only a prude." "She is calm," said the stranger, "because she is mistress of her subject. 'Tis the secret of self-possession. She is here as a duchess at court." They brought in Coningsby's meal, and he invited the stranger to join him. The invitation was accepted with cheerfulness. "'Tis but simple fare," said Coningsby, as the maiden uncovered the still hissing bacon and the eggs that looked like tufts of primroses. "Nay, a national dish," said the stranger, glancing quickly at the table, "whose fame is a proverb, and what more should we expect under a simple roof? How much better than an omelette or a greasy olla that they would give us in a posada? 'Tis a wonderful country, this England. What a napkin! How spotless! And so sweet! I declare 'tis a perfume. There is not a princess throughout the south of Europe served with the cleanliness that meets us in this cottage." "An inheritance from our Saxon fathers," said Coningsby. "I apprehend the northern nations have a greater sense of cleanliness, of propriety, of what we call comfort." "By no means," said the stranger. "The East is the land of the bath. Moses and Mohammed made cleanliness religion." "You will let me help you?" said Coningsby, offering him a plate which he had filled. "I thank you," said the stranger, "but it is one of my bread days. With your permission this shall be my dish," and he cut off from the large loaf a supply of crusts. "'Tis but unsavoury fare after a gallop," said Coningsby. "Ah, you are proud of your bacon and eggs," said the stranger, smiling, "but I love corn and wine. They are our chief and our oldest luxuries. Time has brought us substitutes, but how inferior! Man has deified corn and wine, but not even the Chinese or the Irish have raised temples to tea and potatoes." "But Ceres without Bacchus," said Coningsby. "How does that do? Think you, under this roof, we could invoke the god?" "Let us swear by his body that we will try," said the stranger. Alas! the landlord was not a priest to Bacchus. But then these inquiries led to the finest perry in the world. The young men agreed that they had seldom tasted anything more delicious. They sent for another bottle. Coningsby, who was much interested by his new companion, enjoyed himself amazingly. A cheese such as Derby alone can produce could not induce the stranger to be even partially inconstant to his crusts. But his talk was as vivacious as if the talker had been stimulated by the juices of the finest banquet. Coningsby had never met or read of any one like this chance companion. His sentences were so short, his language so racy, his voice rang so clear, his elocution was so complete. On all subjects his mind seemed to be instructed, and his opinions formed. He flung out a result in a few words. He solved with a phrase some deep problem that men muse over for years. He said many things that were strange, yet they immediately appeared to be true. Then, without the slightest air of pretension or parade, he seemed to know everybody as well as everything. Monarchs, statesmen, authors, adventurers, of all descriptions and of all climes, if their names occurred in the conversation, he described them in an epigrammatic sentence, or revealed their precise position, character, calibre, by a curt dramatic trait. All this, too, without any excitement of manner; on the contrary, with repose amounting almost to nonchalance. If his address had any fault in it, it was rather a deficiency of earnestness. A slight spirit of mockery played over his speech, even when you deemed him most serious. You were startled by his sudden transitions from profound thought to poignant sarcasm. A very singular freedom from passion and prejudice on every topic on which they treated might be some compensation for this want of earnestness, perhaps was its consequence. Certainly it was difficult to ascertain his precise opinions on many subjects, though his manner was frank even to abandonment. And yet throughout his whole conversation not a stroke of egotism, not a word, not a circumstance escaped him, by which you could judge of his position or purposes in life. As little did he seem to care to discover those of his companion. He did not by any means monopolize the conversation. Far from it. He continually asked questions, and while he received answers or had engaged his fellow traveller in any exposition of his opinion or feelings, he listened with a serious and fixed attention, looking Coningsby in the face with a steadfast glance. "I perceive," said Coningsby, pursuing a strain of thought which the other had indicated, "that you have great confidence in the influence of individual character. I also have some confused persuasions of that kind. But is it not the spirit of the age?" "The age does not believe in great men, because it does not possess any," replied the stranger. "The spirit of the age is the very thing that a great man changes." "But does he not rather avail himself of it?" inquired Coningsby. "Parvenus do," rejoined his companion, "but not prophets, great legislators, great conquerors. They destroy and they create." "But are these times for great legislators and great conquerors?" urged Coningsby. "When were they wanted more?" asked the stranger. "From the throne to the hovel all call for a guide. You give monarchs constitutions to teach them sovereignty, and nations Sunday schools to inspire them with faith." "But what is an individual," exclaimed Coningsby, "against a vast public opinion?" "Divine," said the stranger. "God made man in his own image, but the public is made by newspapers, members of Parliament, excise officers, poor law guardians. Would Philip have succeeded if Epaminondas had not been slain? And if Philip had not succeeded? Would Prussia have existed had Frederick not been born? And if Frederick had not been born? What would have been the fate of the Stuarts if Prince Henry had not died, and Charles the First, as was intended, had been Archbishop of Canterbury?" "But when men are young they want experience," said Coningsby, "and when they have gained experience they want energy." "Great men never want experience," said the stranger. "But everybody says that experience—" "Is the best thing in the world, a treasure for you, for me, for millions, but for a creative mind, less than nothing. Almost everything that is great has been done by youth." "It is at least a creed flattering to our years," said Coningsby with a smile. "Nay," said the stranger, "for life in general there is but one decree. Youth is a blunder, manhood a struggle, old age a regret. Do not suppose," he added, smiling, "that I hold that youth is genius. All that I say is, that genius, when young, is divine. Why, the greatest captains of ancient and modern times both conquered Italy at 25. Youth, extreme youth, overthrew the Persian Empire. Don John of Austria won Lepanto at 25, the greatest battle of modern time. Had it not been for the jealousy of Philip, the next year he would have been Emperor of Mauritania. Gaston de Foix was only 22 when he stood a victor on the plain of Ravenna. Every one remembers Condé and Rocroi at the same age. Gustavus Adolphus died at 38. Look at his captains. That wonderful Duke of Weimar, only 36 when he died. Bagné himself, after all his miracles, died at 45. Cortes was little more than 30 when he gazed upon the golden cumulus of Mexico. When Maurice of Saxony died at 32, all Europe acknowledged the loss of the greatest captain and the profoundest statesman of the age. Then there is Nelson, Clive, but these are warriors, and perhaps you may think there are greater things than war. I do not. I worship the Lord of Hosts. But take the most illustrious achievements of civil prudence. Innocent III, the greatest of the popes, was the despot of Christendom at 37. John de Medici was a cardinal at 15, and, according to Guicciardini, baffled with his statecraft Ferdinand of Aragon himself. He was pope as Leo X at 37. Luther robbed him even of his richest province at 35. Take Ignatius Loyola and John Wesley. They worked with young brains. Ignatius was only 30 when he made his pilgrimage and wrote the spiritual exercises. Pascal wrote a great work at 16 and died at 37, the greatest of Frenchmen. Ah, that fatal 37, which reminds me of Byron, greater even as a man than a writer. Was it experience that guided the pencil of Raphael when he painted the palaces of Rome? He too died at 37. Richelieu was Secretary of State at 31. Well then, there were Bolingbroke and Pitt, both ministers before other men left off cricket. Grotius was in great practice at 17, and Attorney General at 24. And Aquaviva was General of the Jesuits, ruled every cabinet in Europe, and colonized America before he was 37. What a career! Exclaimed the stranger, rising from his chair and walking up and down the room. The secret sway of Europe! That was indeed a position. But it is needless to multiply instances. The history of heroes is the history of youth. "Ah," said Coningsby, "I should like to be a great man." The stranger threw him a scrutinizing glance. His countenance was serious. He said in a voice of almost solemn melody, "Nurture your mind with great thoughts. To believe in the heroic makes heroes." "You seem to me a hero," said Coningsby, in a tone of real feeling, which, half ashamed of his emotion, he tried to turn into playfulness. "I am, and must ever be," said the stranger, "but a dreamer of dreams." Then going towards the window, and changing into a familiar tone, as if to divert the conversation, he added, "What a delicious afternoon! I look forward to my ride with delight. You rest here?" "No, I go on to Nottingham, where I shall sleep." "And I in the opposite direction." And he rang the bell and ordered his horse. "I long to see your mare again," said Coningsby. "She seemed to me so beautiful." "She is not only of pure race," said the stranger, "but of the highest and rarest breed in Arabia. Her name is the Daughter of the Star. She is a foal of that famous mare which belonged to the Prince of the Wahhabis, and to possess which, I believe, was one of the principal causes of war between that tribe and the Egyptians. The Pasha of Egypt gave me to her, and I would not change her for her statue in pure gold, even carved by Lysippus. Come round to the stable and see her." They went out together. It was a soft sunny afternoon, the air fresh from the rain, but mild and exhilarating. The groom brought forth the mare. The daughter of the star stood before Coningsby with her sinewy shape of matchless symmetry, her burnished skin, black mane, legs like those of an antelope, her little ears, dark speaking eye, and tail worthy of a pasha. And who was her master, and whither was she about to take him? Coningsby was so naturally well bred that we may be sure it was not curiosity. No, it was a finer feeling that made him hesitate and think a little, and then say, "I am sorry to part." "I also," said the stranger, "but life is constant separation." "I hope we may meet again," said Coningsby. "If our acquaintance be worth preserving," said the stranger, "you may be sure it will not be lost." "But mine is not worth preserving," said Coningsby earnestly. "It is yours that is the treasure. You teach me things of which I have long mused." The stranger took the bridle of the daughter of the star, and turning round with a faint smile, extended his hand to his companion. "Your mind at least is nurtured with great thought," said Coningsby. "Your actions should be heroic." "Action is not for me," said the stranger. "I am of that faith that the apostles professed before they followed their master." He vaulted into his saddle. The daughter of the star bounded away as if she scented the air of the desert from which she and her rider had alike sprung, and Coningsby remained in profound meditation. End of Chapter 1. Book 3, Chapter 2. The day after his adventure at the Forest Inn, Coningsby arrived at Beaumanoir. It was several years since he had visited the family of his friend, who were indeed also his kin, and in his boyish days had often proved that they were not unmindful of the affinity. This was a visit that had long been counted on, long promised, and which a variety of circumstances had hitherto prevented. It was to have been made by the schoolboy, it was to be fulfilled by the man. For no less a character could Coningsby under any circumstances now consent to claim, since he was closely verging to the completion of his 19th year, and it appeared manifest that if it were his destiny to do anything great, he had but few years to wait before the full development of his power. Visions of Gastons de Foix and Maurices of Saxony, statesmen giving up cricket to govern nations, beardless Jesuits plunged in profound abstraction in omnipotent cabinets, haunted his fancy from the moment he had separated from his mysterious and deeply interesting companion. To nurture his mind with great thoughts had ever been Coningsby's inspiring habit. Was it also destined that he should achieve the heroic? There are some books, when we close them, one or two, in the course of our life, difficult as it may be to analyse or ascertain the cause, our minds seem to have made a great leap. 1,000 obscure things receive light, a multitude of indefinite feelings are determined. Our intellect grasps and grapples with all subjects with a capacity, a flexibility, and a vigour before unknown to us. It masters questions hitherto perplexing, which are not even touched or referred to in the volume just closed. What is this magic? It is the spirit of the supreme author, by a magnetic influence blending with our sympathising intelligence, that directs and inspires it. By that mysterious sensibility we extend to questions which he has not treated the same intellectual force which he has exercised over those which he has expounded. His genius for a time remains in us. 'Tis the same with human beings as with books. All of us encounter, at least once in our life, some individual who utters words that make us think for ever. There are men whose phrases are oracles, who condense in a sentence the secrets of life, who blurt out an aphorism that forms a character or illustrates an existence. A great thing is a great book, but greater than all is the talk of a great man. And what is a great man? Is it a minister of state? Is it a victorious general? A gentleman in the Windsor uniform? A field marshal covered with stars? Is it a prelate or a prince? A king, even an emperor? It may be all of these. Yet these, as we must all daily feel, are not necessarily great men. A great man is one who affects the mind of his generation, whether he be a monk in his cloister agitating Christendom, or a monarch crossing the Granicus and giving a new character to the pagan world. Our young Coningsby reached Beaumanoir in a state of meditation. He also desired to be great, not from the restless vanity that sometimes impels youth to momentary exertion, by which they sometimes obtain a distinction as evanescent as their energy. The ambition of our hero was altogether of a different character. It was indeed, at present, not a little vague, indefinite, hesitating, inquiring, sometimes desponding. What were his powers? What should be his aim? Were often to him, as to all young aspirants, questions infinitely perplexing and full of pain. But on the whole there ran through his character, notwithstanding his many dazzling qualities and accomplishments, and his juvenile celebrity, which has spoiled so much promise, a vein of grave simplicity that was the consequence of an earnest temper and of an intellect that would be content with nothing short of the profound. His was a mind that loved to pursue every question to the centre. But it was not a spirit of scepticism that impelled this habit. On the contrary, it was the spirit of faith. Coningsby found that he was born in an age of infidelity in all things, and his heart assured him that a want of faith was a want of nature. But his vigorous intellect could not take refuge in that maudlin substitute for belief, which consists in a patronage of fantastic theories. He needed that deep and enduring conviction that the heart and the intellect, feeling and reason united, can alone supply. He asked himself why governments were hated and religions despised, why loyalty was dead and reverence only a galvanized corpse. These were indeed questions that had as yet presented themselves to his thought in a crude and imperfect form, but their very occurrence showed the strong predisposition of his mind. It was because he had not found guides among his elders that his thoughts had been turned to the generation that he himself represented. The sentiment of veneration was so developed in his nature that he was exactly the youth that would have hung with enthusiastic humility on the accents of some sage of old in the groves of Academus or the porch of Zeno. But as yet he had found age only perplexed and desponding, manhood only callous and desperate. Some thought that systems would last their time, others that something would turn up. His deep and pious spirit recoiled with disgust and horror from such lax, chance-meddling maxims that would, in their consequences, reduce man to the level of the brutes. Notwithstanding a prejudice which had haunted him from his childhood, he had, when the occasion offered, applied to Mr. Rigby for instruction, as one distinguished in the republic of letters as well as the realm of politics, who assumed the guidance of the public mind, and, as the phrase runs, was looked up to. Mr. Rigby listened at first to the inquiries of Coningsby, urged as they ever were with the modesty and deference which do not always characterize juvenile investigations, as if Coningsby was speaking to him of the unknown tongues. But Mr. Rigby was not a man who ever confessed himself at fault. He caught up something of the subject as our young friend proceeded, and was perfectly prepared, long before he had finished, to take the whole conversation into his own hands. Mr. Rigby began by ascribing everything to the Reform Bill, and then referred to several of his own speeches on Schedule A. Then he told Coningsby that want of religious faith was solely occasioned by want of churches, and want of loyalty by George IV having shut himself up too much at the cottage in Windsor Park, entirely against the advice of Mr. Rigby. He assured Coningsby that the Church Commission was operating wonders, and that with private benevolence, he had himself subscribed £1,000 for Lord Monmouth, we should soon have churches enough. The great question now was their architecture. Had George IV lived, all would have been right. They would have been built on the model of the Buddhist pagoda. As for loyalty, if the present king went regularly to Ascot races, he had no doubt all would go right. Finally, Mr. Rigby impressed on Coningsby to read the Quarterly Review with great attention, and to make himself master of Mr. Wordy's History of the Late War in 20 volumes, a capital work, which proves that Providence was on the side of the Tories. Coningsby did not reply to Mr. Rigby again, but worked on with his own mind, coming often enough to sufficiently crude conclusions, and often much perplexed and harassed. He tried occasionally his inferences on his companions, who were intelligent and full of fervour. Millbank was more than this. He was of a thoughtful mood. He also caught up from a new school some principles which were materials for discussion. One way or another, however, before he quitted Eton, there prevailed among this circle of friends the initial idea doubtless emanating from Coningsby, an earnest, though a rather vague conviction that the present state of feeling in matters both civil and religious was not healthy, that there must be substituted for this latitudinarianism something sound and deep, fervent and well defined, and that the priests of this new faith must be found among the new generation, so that when the bright-minded rider of the Daughter of the Star descanted on the influence of individual character, of great thoughts and heroic actions, and the divine power of youth and genius, he touched a string that was the very heart-chord of his companion, who listened with fascinated enthusiasm as he introduced him to his gallery of inspiring models. Coningsby arrived at Beaumanoir at a season when men can neither hunt nor shoot. Great internal resources should be found in a country family under such circumstances. The Duke and Duchess had returned from London only a few days with their daughter, who had been presented this year. They were all glad to find themselves again in the country which they loved and which loved them. One of their sons-in-law and his wife and Henry Sidney completed the party. There are few conjunctures in life of a more startling interest than to meet the pretty little girl that we have gambolled with in our boyhood, and to find her changed in the lapse of a very few years, which in some instances may not have brought a corresponding alteration in our own appearance, into a beautiful woman. Something of this flitted over Coningsby's mind as he bowed, a little agitated from his surprise, to Lady Theresa Sidney. All that he remembered had prepared him for beauty, but not for the degree or character of beauty that he met. It was a rich, sweet face, with blue eyes and dark lashes, and a nose that we have no epithet in England to describe, but which charmed in Roxalana. Her brown hair fell over her white and well-turned shoulders in long and luxuriant tresses. One has met something as brilliant and dainty in a medallion of old Sèvres, or amid the terraces and gardens of Watteau. Perhaps Lady Theresa, too, might have welcomed him with more freedom, had his appearance also more accorded with the image which he had left behind. Coningsby was a boy then, as we have described him in our first chapter. Though only 19 now, he had attained his full stature, which was above the middle height, and time had fulfilled that promise of symmetry in his figure and grace in his mien, then so largely intimated. Time, too, which had not yet robbed his countenance of any of its physical beauty, had strongly developed the intellectual charm by which it had ever been distinguished. As he bowed lowly before the Duchess and her daughter, it would have been difficult to imagine a youth of a mien more prepossessing and a manner more finished. A manner that was spontaneous, nature's pure gift, the reflex of his feeling. No artifice prompted that profound and polished homage. Not one of those influences, the aggregate of whose sway produces, as they tell us, the finished gentleman, had ever exercised its beneficent power on our orphan, and not rarely forlorn, Coningsby. No clever and refined woman, with her quick perception and nice criticism that never offends our self-love, had ever given him that education that is more precious than universities. The mild suggestions of a sister, the gentle raillery of some laughing cousin, are also advantages not always appreciated at the time, but which boys, when they have become men, often think over with gratitude and a little remorse at the ungracious spirit in which they were received. Not even the dancing master had afforded his mechanical aid to Coningsby, who, like all Eton boys of his generation, viewed that professor of accomplishments with frank repugnance. But even in the boisterous life of school, Coningsby, though his style was free and flowing, was always well bred. His spirit recoiled from that gross familiarity that is the characteristic of modern manners, and which would destroy all forms and ceremonies merely because they curb and control their own coarse convenience and ill-disguised selfishness. To women, however, Coningsby instinctively bowed, as to beings set apart for reverence and delicate treatment. Little as his experience was of them, his spirit had been fed with chivalrous fancies, and he entertained for them all the ideal devotion of a Surrey or a Sidney. Instructed, if not learned, as books and thought had already made him in men, he could not conceive that there were any other women in the world than fair Geraldines and Countesses of Pembroke. There was not a country house in England that had so completely the air of habitual residence as Beaumanoir. It is a charming trait and very rare. In many great mansions everything is as stiff, formal, and tedious as if your host were a Spanish grandee in the days of the Inquisition. No ease, no resources. The passing life seems a solemn spectacle in which you play a part. How delightful was the morning room at Beaumanoir, from which gentlemen were not excluded with that assumed suspicion that they can never enter it but for felonious purposes. Such a profusion of flowers, such a multitude of books, such a various prodigality of writing materials, so many easy chairs, too, of so many shapes, each in itself a comfortable home, yet nothing crowded. Woman alone can organize a drawing-room. Man succeeds sometimes in a library. And the ladies' work! How graceful they look bending over their embroidery frames, consulting over the arrangement of a group or the colour of a flower. The panniers and fanciful baskets, overflowing with variegated worsted, are gay and full of pleasure to the eye, and give an air of elegant business that is vivifying. Even the sight of employment interests. Then the morning costume of English women is itself a beautiful work of art. At this period of the day they can find no rivals in other climes. The brilliant complexions of the daughters of the North dazzle in daylight. The illumined saloon levels all distinctions. One should see them in their well-fashioned muslin dresses. What matrons and what maidens! Full of graceful dignity, fresher than the morn, and the married beauty in her little lace cap. Ah, she is a coquette, a charming character at all times, in a country house an invaluable one. A coquette is a being who wishes to please, amiable being. If you do not like her, you will have no difficulty in finding a female companion of a different move. Alas, coquettes are but too rare. 'Tis a career that requires great abilities, infinite pains, a gay and airy spirit. 'Tis the coquette that provides all amusement, suggests the riding party, plans the picnic, gives and guesses charades, acts them. She is the stirring element amid the heavy congeries of social atoms, the soul of the house, the salt of the banquet. Let any one pass a very agreeable week, or it may be 10 days, under any roof, and analyse the cause of his satisfaction, and one might safely make a gentle wager that his solution would present him with the frolic phantom of a coquette. "It is impossible that Mr. Coningsby can remember me," said a clear voice, and he looked round and was greeted by a pair of sparkling eyes and the gayest smile in the world. It was Lady Everingham, the Duke's married daughter. End of chapter 2.